Welcome everyone to our panel. This is an Xbox Game Studios panel on scaling cross-platform development across Xbox and PC. I'm joined with a number of our technical leaders across Microsoft's first-party studios, Xbox Game Studios, and here is the Okay, great. So here's the agenda, what we're going to cover today, a number of sort of questions that we're going to have, and we're going to have a pretty informal back and forth discussion from a developer's perspective on cross-platform development. We're going to talk about our technical strategies for cross-platform development within our different studios, scalability, how we ensure our games are performant across the different devices that we develop for, cross-platform play, cross-platform progression, how we think about that at our different studios, how we approach it. And we'll talk a little bit about technology collaboration across our studios and how we work with Xbox and other development teams within Microsoft. So here are our panelists here. We're going to do introductions. Each of us are going to introduce ourselves. We have panelists from the Initiative, Obsidian, Double Fine, Machine Games, the Coalition, and a central Xbox Games Technology Group. So I'll start. I'm Kate Rayner. My pronouns are she, her. I am the studio technical director at the Coalition, a home of the Gears of War franchise. I'm also, I head up our central technology team called the Xbox Games Technology Group. I'm a corporate vice president at Microsoft and a technical fellow. I've been with Microsoft for 14 years. Previous to that, I was at Electronic Arts for 14 years as well. You can see, obviously, these aren't all Microsoft first-party titles. Gears of War, of course, for over the last decade, and then a number of titles, all cross-platform titles going back to, dating myself here, the late 90s. The first game developers conference I went to was in 1997. And so GDC has a lot of fond memories for me. I came to GDC early in my career to learn from other game developers, and over time, it's really great to be able to come back and meet other developers, but also share experiences that I've had, for us to share the experiences we've had with other developers. So it's a real honor for me to be here today and to be able to talk with you. So, with that, Soren.
Yeah, so my name is Soren. My pronouns are he and him. I am currently the technical... my name is Soren. My pronouns are he and him. I am the technical director at the Initiative. Like Kate, I've also been working on games since the 90s. The first cross-platform game I ever did was on Sega Saturn and Windows 95, back when most of the code on the console was written in assembly. So things have changed a lot since then. For the better, mostly. And so today I am leading up the engine side of Perfect Dark, which I wish I could talk more about Perfect Dark, but I can't today. So Chad.
All right, I'll go next. I'm Chad Dawson, technical director at Double Fine Productions. For those of you who don't know our studio, we're celebrating our 25th anniversary this year. I'm happy to say, and I'm joined here by some of my fellow Double Fine developers.
Right.
Great to see them come out. We're a smaller studio joining Xbox about 5 years ago, and we're located here in San Francisco. We're a smallish team, but a passionate team. And as you can see on the right, that's a lot of the games that we've come out with over the past. I've been lucky to be a lead programmer on some of the ones at the top, but really rely on my great team to back me up. And happy to be here at GDC. I'll pass it on.
Hi, everyone. This one, I guess. Hi, everyone. My name is Chuck Rojan. I'm a graphics programmer over at Obsidian Entertainment. We just recently put out Avowed, and we've been really busy with that. Previously, I was at AMD and NVIDIA doing like shader optimization and driver stuff, more on the GPU hardware research side, but came over to games, do some more hands-on optimization. So yeah, leave it to Phil now.
Cool. Hey folks, my name is Phil Cousins. I'm the technical director of our engine team over at the Coalition, and also the technical director of a group that we'll mention a little bit more later, which we call the Xbox Games Technology Group, where we have a bit of a remit to kind of look at sharing kind of tools and technologies across the wider Xbox ecosystem. A bit of history of me, being at Xbox just over 18 years, worked at Rare in the UK, a company called Big Park, and the Coalition as well. Shipped a bunch of games, about 13 in total. I've worked on things like streaming apps when we were doing those over at Xbox as well. Spent a bit of time away from games as well, actually. So I worked at Slack, the chat client, where I led up some iOS, Android, and desktop stuff, and also worked at Amazon Web Services. So a lot of experience in cross-platform play, and definitely trying to help folks power great game creation at that point. So, and finally over to Magnus.
Okay. So hi, I'm Magnus Auna. I'm the lead engine programmer over at Machine Games back home in Sweden. I've been with Machine Games since they got acquired by Zenimax like 15 years ago, roughly now. And I've been a part of the Wolfenstein series, and recently last year we shipped Indiana Jones. And before that I was mostly over at Starbreeze for roughly 10 years, going back to The Darkness and the original Chronicles of Riddick, released for the original Xbox console back then. So I've seen many of these generational shifts and the problems trying to release games in the generational shift between platforms, etc. I consider myself usually a generalist. I've seen most portions of game development when it comes to programming throughout these years. But if it's something that really gets me going when it comes to game programming, it's a hard crash bite to crack.
Oh, all right. Okay, great. So why don't we jump into our first topic? We're going to talk about technical strategies that we have at our different studios for cross-platform development. What are some of the key technologies, some of the philosophies, the way that each of us thinks about and approaches cross-platform development within our studio, and let's just see where the topic takes us. So, Magnus, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. We do the kind of traditional way of thinking of it, that we try to abstract away the platform a little bit. That has its problems when a platform has really unique abilities that you need to surface as well. So that abstraction can be a bit hard. We always try to find a solution that fits most platforms. Because it's less maintenance that needs to happen, etc., for all the platforms. There's loads of great middleware out there that you can ship on several platforms at the same time. One thing that we have seen when it comes to if you are, especially if you are shipping on PC and for consoles, for example, that if you do multiple platforms, they help each other out. So the PC will be better because you have an Xbox and vice versa, for example. Because there's different compilers that have different warnings, different tool sets. The timing stability, for example, for a console is really good when you're trying to do race condition debugging and see what's going on there. PC, that's harder, for example. And some things that are subtly on one platform is a hard crash on another platform. So if you solve that hard crash, maybe the other platform will get better as well throughout that whole process. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, our strategy was pretty similar for Avowed. So in our case, we sort of picked the Xbox Series S as our min spec, which naturally led us into DirectX 12 and the GDK. But what we found is that ended up opening up a lot more platforms than we necessarily expected, right? Because the Steam Deck supports DirectX 12, right? And there's Linux machines that support DirectX 12, right? And so we had to think about a lot more platforms than we initially realized, right? We were able to get running on those platforms and we didn't necessarily have huge issues, but we had to think about them, right? And so we had to set up systems and processes, especially with respect to QA and telemetry, to sort of relentlessly profile those things. and keep a good eye on our min spec and on our variety of platforms to make sure we weren't having weird issues just on one thing. But we did find the same thing as Magnus, where when we found an issue on a platform, that actually helped all the other platforms because it was an error, it was a bug, it was just crashing somewhere and not crashing somewhere else, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't mind building on that a little bit. I guess similar to Chuck, as an Unreal Studio, primarily we're a PC developer. A lot of our work is done on PC. And we're pretty fortunate that Unreal actually supports a lot of platforms out of the box. But I think it's a little bit of a double-edged sword where, because your team is very much used to iterating and kind of developing on PC, sometimes those other platforms kind of get a little bit kind of like lost, or they don't actually like get onto that platform and actually make sure their stuff actually works. And there are obviously subtle differences when it comes to things like, graphical settings are different on different platforms, maybe APIs for like the stores are different. I think one thing that I like to call out is that, I think the GDK has been pretty awesome for us in terms of the fact that it works both on Xbox and on PC. And it really does help that kind of cross-platform development of like, okay, things that I can target the GDK are, guaranteed to work on those different platforms. And we even went as far as getting the GDK itself working in our editor. So the idea is that people don't have to leave their development environment of the editor. They can do Pi, they can actually interact with all those different things with the GDK, which really meant that you have a leg up when it comes to actually, compiling out for, say, the Xbox or a PC standalone SKU. That stuff is, more likely to work, and you get kind of really good iteration with that kind of Pi setup. So.
I'll go ahead. At Double Fine, we have a long history of developing for cross-platform. If you know our history of our indie game development, we pretty much develop for anything that we could get our hands on. So when we think about games, we're always thinking about what it might be on a different platform when we get there. We typically start our development on the PC side. Our games, we try to create a different game every time we make a game, so we don't really have a min spec that are, a core level we're shooting for. We figure that out as we go along. But as our development starts on the PC, we always try to get our console builds and our other platform builds up as early as we can. That's really one of our key things, to get not just our programming team, but our artists as well, quickly looking at how the builds look on those and testing them out. We're also an Unreal Studio now, shifting most of our development over to that. So we benefit from that, being able to get build up and going early. But if I had some recommendation, it would be, definitely get your console builds going early and compare the two and see how they are. And get your team used to that if you can.
Yeah, so I want to build on that because to be successful in making any kind of game, iteration speed for content is key. You don't get anything polished unless you can iterate rapidly. And we're also an Unreal Studio, and so Pi Play and Editor is amazing, right? You can instantly get that feedback, but that only works on PC. And there are a bunch of differences between playing in Editor on PC and to really get the full console experience. I and many of the people at our studio are like console developers at heart, and so it was important for us to get more hands-on with the console. But because it's so easy to do Pi, it takes a long time to do a local build and push it to your console. If you do the builds on your PC and your PC is kind of frozen while you do all of it, you can't really do anything. And so people didn't really want to do that. It was just painful. So we invested heavily in a build infrastructure to support. You can make a change list and shelve it and send it up to our build system, and it's going to build the Xbox version for you. And it's going to, we also have a tool that a lot of studios use for distributing builds, pushing builds directly to your PC or your dev kit whenever it's done. So people just leave their Xbox running, and they kick off this build, go back and do the other thing, and then a little while later, the Xbox build just shows up, it's done, and it's ready to run. So it kind of took the pain away of having to wait for build to do builds manually. So that's kind of the hack that we have done that brought console more back for everybody else. Plus, then people didn't have to worry about installing, the artists don't have to worry about installing compilers and everything on their PC. So it just made life easier for us.
Awesome. Phil mentioned the Game Developers Kit, and at the Coalition, it's been really effective for us for cross-platform development. if I think kind of back to where we've been in the past, we've had, the Xbox with the XDK and exclusive resource applications. We've had these fragmented APIs across different platforms going back a decade ago, the somewhat misguided UWP applications for Windows development, for gaming. And now we have this uniform GDK with the C++ API that allows us to develop across Xbox, Windows, and PC handheld. And it's also this pathway to get us to xCloud streaming as well by using that same development kit across all platforms. It includes, for those who may not be familiar with the GDK, it includes things like game input, DirectX 12, DirectX graphics, systems APIs like direct storage, networking and multiplayer APIs, common packaging tools for how we package and distribute our game across all these different platforms, and tools from the console space that are near and dear to us, like Pix, the Performance Investigator for Xbox, and bringing those to Windows, where the team has continually improved these tools with our feedback from studios. In fact, I'm actually really excited about the focus I see with the GDK team, with the Xbox team. We are pretty critical as game developers. We give a lot of feedback, and I know there's lots of improvements and continuing development going on there, just to make it easier to develop across more platforms and devices with the GDK. So let's go on to our next topic. This is about ensuring that our games are performant and can scale across different devices. It'd be interesting just to hear from each of the panelists about how they think about this, how they think about ensuring their game will scale and be performant, but also without compromising on the quality, how you think about minimum spec, how you think about any strategies or learnings that you might share with everyone here. So yeah, I guess we'll go to the end again.
Okay. So we've done the mistake one time to you take a game and we're gonna port it to a lower end platform. That is pain. And so always when you try to set your main spec and then you do add stuff on top of the game instead of trying to scale it back, because that's is very, very hard to do in general. But always when you're doing the min-spec version, you need to make sure that you have content available, like high-res content for the top-end spec as well. So we always try to port upwards, not downwards. It can be done, but it's a lot harder to get a good product out that way. And when it comes to the min-spec, we usually just look at the console markets and what we will kind of want to target, and correlate it a little bit into the PC market and see what would that fit into, what would that be like a PC type equivalent, and then you kind of project a few years, because when you start in production, it's going to be a few years into the future when the game gets released, and then you hope that you made a correct judgment there. Otherwise, you need to optimize a bit more in the end to try to get that down a little bit. One thing that we found throughout the years is very beneficial is that we always try to make all the memory work for us. So we always try to allocate everything up front, and every system is responsible for their memory. And if they get oversaturated and they run out of memory, they have to gracefully fail. And that could be the easy portions of this would be textures and models, like you don't get the highest MIP or you don't get the highest log level, etc. But they should always be able to fail gracefully. And then we run defraggers on this all the time, so we make sure all the memory in the console is actually used, or on PC for that matter, for example, because that is starting to become a premium in general. And also when we do all our performance measurements when it comes to this is that anything that has any dynamic resolution scaling and stuff like that, turn that off, because you're just gonna lie to yourself a lot when if you do benchmarking with that on, in general.
Yeah, so I want to build on that because the dynamic, anything that dynamically adjusts, any dynamic load balancing can throw off any kind of performance measuring you're doing as well. If you are sitting there and you are optimizing and you're trying to save a millisecond or two, but you see no result because all of a sudden the dynamic load balancer says, okay, well now we have room for this many more particles. So you feel like there's no progress. And in the opposite direction, it also goes like, well, artists feel like they can just throw in more stuff because it still runs great.
Right.
We've definitely seen that go both ways. So turn off anything dynamic when you do your performance reporting, and then try to get your performance reporting to report like one single specific number you can look at. You don't want to say that it runs at this frame rate with 89%, but yesterday it was this many frames with 85%. You want it to be one single number. Ideally, turn it into a color or something. So you can have a giant sheet that says green good, red bad, that you can look at in 5 seconds and assign out level 1. You need to focus on that. But all the other levels run fine. Like if you don't get to that level, it gets really hard to know what do we have to look at today. So
That's a good point, Soren. One thing that we've been implementing that really helps, we talked a little bit earlier in this talk about having a good build system that can build it for multiple platforms and then distribute your builds to your Xboxes and PC. When you can get an automated system like that going, you can really build on it when you start doing measurements for performance. A key part of our thing is gathering measurements at all points during levels, across levels, so that we have a good baseline every day, every build, multiple times a day of how our game is running in memory, performance, and optimizations that we do. A nice part of it is that when an artist makes a change, they can quickly identify that this change I made affected performance, because you get those results quickly. Maybe even a part of the level that they weren't looking at, if you can run through automated testing. It's really been gathering that statistics and telemetry as part of our automated build process has been huge.
yeah.
Yeah, I would really agree with that. Like, actually, setting up a system that does this sort of thing is really important, especially because there are so many different various upscalers and various options that you can do, right? Which may look slightly different, which may, have an issue or something like that. Something that I think is really important with that is that you need to give your artists the ability to actually see all of the different upscalers, to look at every one. This is what the material looks like on DLSS, this is what it looks like on FSR, because otherwise they can often be very surprised by the differences that arise just through those sort of things, right? So that's very important in that sense of your automation, right? Is to actually look at all of the different upscalers and present that information to the artists. Part of that is like education, actually educating people about what the upscalers are and how they're slightly different, right? An important component of that is that DLSS is artificial intelligence. It works a little bit differently than FSR, right? So, informing QA and the artists about that is pretty important, right? Keeping dynamic res off, as has already been said, right? And also just profiling relentlessly. What we found is that our QA team was really excellent about profiling, and that allowed us to find things that we wouldn't have expected necessarily. Like, one thing we found is that ray trace shadows actually performed better on Xbox than virtual shadow maps, right? And so we were able to actually get better quality and better performance, and we just had to keep an eye on that in order to actually see that, right? So.
Yeah, and just to probably just build on what Chuck said, I think it's kind of the key point that you made, and I kind of just want to reiterate, it's just like, it's a collaboration for sure. It's like working with the content teams is a big thing, because when you're kind of looking at kind of the target platforms you're looking at from both the min-spec stuff that Magnus was talking about, and that kind of ultra high-end, like, you want your content team to make the content once. You don't want to make the content 2, 3, 4, 5 times, depending on kind of like how far you're trying to scale. So working with those folks, trying to understand like what capabilities are we trying to target, what are those kind of far-reaching ones that we're going to try to go for, and what's that middle ground so we can scale that up, scale that down. Maybe it's LODs, maybe it's other things like HLODs, maybe it's say like, things like FSR, DLSS help you a lot in that space, but it's definitely making sure that like that team, as Chuck was saying, can actually see that stuff hopefully within real time. Like, can you tweak that stuff in the editor? Can they see those things of like, how's that going to look on target platforms, so they can iterate super, super quickly? And just to build one extra thing on that too is like when you're thinking about that kind of ultra spec high end, think about the consumer too. Like we're very big at the coalition at building things like benchmarks, making sure that you can get in there and people can really like tune it to a hilt of like, how can I get the best out of the rig that I've built, and making sure that your content is also trying to work within that space. So we're very keen on getting a benchmark up early, working with our like independent hardware vendors, getting their take on it, and really making sure that, say, you know, when you actually deliver your game to the public, it's going to scale many years into the future.
So to just also add to what was said about being able to see the different options and for artists to get that feedback without having to spend too much time on it. So one of the things we built that is that's helping with that on our side is our automation, like test performance automation, runs every platform for every major render configuration, for every level, every 4 hours or so, whenever we have a new build. But it has a couple of benefits that when you do performance testing, on PC, performance depends very much on the computer, what's it doing, is anyone playing videos in the background? Like, it's really hard to know whether the number is actually the true number. But if you do performance testing on like an Xbox, it is super consistent. It runs well on my Xbox. Like, it runs the same everywhere. So that's where we look at the performance number. And then if we get a good performance number on Xbox, then have all the options you can tweak on the PC. But so having set that up, we're also using the fly through of the levels we're using a spline curve that we fly through the same every day across all platforms. And we do a video recording of that, which is super useful because then you can do the side-by-side comparisons. Does the low, medium, and high, does it look the same everywhere? Is the colors off a little bit? Or do you just need to tune your TV better? So having that automation, like that's the key for us to bring all the platforms together. Especially the more platforms you add, the more complex it gets to manage this.
When you're shipping across all these different devices, scalability is so key, as everyone's talked about here. We have a scalability quality configuration system. Exposes all of our different rendering features and visual effects and settings and anything that might affect performance, quality. And then we'll define presets, right, for like a canonical low spec, medium spec, recommended spec, ultra or ludicrous spec for all those graphic settings. And then for different devices like a console or a specific handheld where we know the exact configuration, we'll define presets specifically for them that are optimized for our target frame rate and quality, so we're not compromising on either. And then, as Phil mentioned, we expose all that to PC players, right? They expect to be able to tune as much as you can give them to tune all those settings for their rig and then be able to run a benchmark to actually see what's happening with the performance. What we do is we auto-detect the hardware that we're running on PC, because when we ship, this game's going to be around for a while, and we may not know all the hardware that it's going to run against. So we detect that hardware. We do CPU, core evaluation. We look at memory, look at VRAM. We do a GPU synth benchmark. And from that, we'll then map it to custom defaults specific to that hardware. And those become the defaults for that device. And of course, you can go in there and modify it so that even if it's a device we haven't seen before, you're not going to get like ultra spec setting on a low handheld or vice versa. So I think super resolution is interesting. We talked a little bit about that. It's certainly an expectation now on PC. We've been using software-based super resolution as well as vendor resolution techniques like DLSS and FSR. And these are great for democratizing performance. It's really amazing the kind of quality you can get out of these deep learning super resolution techniques. But it allows us to target a higher baseline for the visual quality of our game and then scale up. So it's a choice, of course, you have to make when you define your min spec. We define our min spec pretty early in development. Another thing that we also think about is our simulation tends to be the CPU simulation. We want to ensure that it runs at least 60 usually higher, so that as you get different GPUs and higher performing systems, it can scale so that you're not CPU bound as you scale across different devices. Okay, let's go to our next question. Cross-platform play, cross-platform progression. I know a number of us have been kind of thinking about this or work on cross-platform progression. Some of us cross-platform play. So it'd be great to just hear from everyone sort of how they think about this, how you've approached this, and maybe a little bit about why. So who'd ever like to go kick us off?
I can start. At Double Fine, we're known for a lot of our single-player experiences. Some of our most favorite games are single-player. So for us, cross-platform progression is a big thing. I think as a gamer, you expect it to just be able to play on your Xbox, switch over to your PC, and it just works. You don't have to worry about copying save files or starting a new game from scratch. That's core to us to give our players that experience so that they can get through the game and enjoy it. But it's also interesting how it affects our development as well. As we build that system in place, we'll find that sometimes you might come across a rare bug that happens only on Xbox, but you're able to debug it on PC or vice versa. And having that save game compatibility between the two helps you narrow that down and figure out where that is. Sometimes also our test team puts together a unique save game, and they can do it on any platform and know that we can use that to help narrow down a certain part of the game or a certain launch point for the other games when we're testing, or just speeding up development to have the team be able to jump into the game at a certain point. It's nice to be able to do that across platform.
Yeah, we saw the exact same thing with respect to cross-platform progression, right? At Obsidian, we are also a single-player focused studio, right? So it was the same thing, and for us, we also found that it was very helpful to have QA reproduce something on Xbox or originally find something on Xbox and send over a save that can be done on PC or vice versa. And that really helped us a lot with sort of the really weird or hard to reproduce bugs, or especially bugs that, in our case, since we're an RPG, required a lot of sort of, you go through a quest a certain way, you talk to an NPC and you say these specific things, and other sort of very specific global variables that had to be set at a certain moment in time, right? So it was very helpful for that type of game and that type of development that we did.
Cool. Yeah, I don't mind jumping a little bit. So yeah, traditional Gear is where we obviously are a multiplayer game. So we've got traditional campaign and multiplayer. And I think just it's in our kind of studio culture that we want to make sure that people can basically play with their friends regardless of what platform they're on. So if my friend's playing on PC, I'm on an Xbox, we want to try to kind of lower that barrier and say, like, look, you can play together, you can play co-op, you can jump into a multiplayer game. And it's something that our design team definitely just think about as, like, you know, it's table stakes for what we do. When thinking about it as a studio level, we have to think about kind of what technologies we can lean into and what is available to us to make that kind of like transition easier. So there are things like PlayFab, which is really awesome. Like you can use and lean into services like that, which essentially say, regardless of what platform you're on, you can have a unified backend that will kind of handle a lot of that for you. And we do things like, you know, matchmaking, all that kind of good stuff. So so it doesn't come for free for sure, but it definitely, I think in the modern age, like these folks have already talked about, it's like it's something that players expect of like, hey, if I'm jumping from one platform to another one, hopefully I can bring my saves with me, or again, regardless of what my friends are, I can play with them. So,
yeah, I think we're like when you have cross-platform progression across different devices or different platforms, you have to think of like, what is this connected tissue that you have across all these devices? You need some sort of, you know, unified identity across them. And then you may need a form of account linking that may be like a Microsoft account in the case of us with you know, Xbox and Windows. But it could be something where you're using technology like PlayFab to kind of manage account linking across different devices and different platforms. And then when you're saving your progression, you need a system, of course, that will roam across them. So, and there's lots of ways you can do that. So whether you're just saving some configuration data in your own backend online systems, like we do with PlayFab's online services, or you're using like a cloud-based save system like the X save system that's in the GDK. You know, another thing I wanted to talk about was multiplayer and cross-platform play. This is something that we've done for a number of years, and some of the advantages of having cross-platform play is you just have this larger player pool across these different devices, which allows you to have better matchmaking, more players searching to play a game at the same time, better skills-based matching, where you can find more developer or more players that have similar skill to you. You also need to invest in matchmaking systems that, of course, will work across devices. We use PlayFab's multiplayer systems for that. And we also invest in skills-based matchmaking because it ends up sort of ensuring that you have a bit of normalization across different devices for skill. And so we've done this on Gears 5, and we'll do it on all our future titles as well. And another thing to think about with cross-platform play is also giving players choice, right? So it can also be a controversial feature in some cases. So in console, we usually give the option to opt out, console versus PC. But we tend to default it on, at least in our titles, so that we can get the most number of people playing together, but give them that choice to opt out. I think some of that concern comes from concerns of balance against different devices or cheating on PC. And I think, it's important to think about making these investments for both like skills-based matchmaking, as well as investing in anti-cheat and anti-tamper if you have PC in the mix with console, and maybe also biasing matchmaking against device type, whether it's a mouse and keyboard or controller. These are all things to sort of consider. But we've certainly seen a lot of value, especially in the PC space, being able to have a larger pool of players. It's also important when you have a game that's going across the world and you may have fewer players in one region, or someone who wants to play a game in the middle of the night is looking for someone to play with. Okay, so we'll go to our last question about technology collaboration. So this is really about like what sort of tech collaboration you see across studios or partner studios that you work with, or with other parts of the organization, and what benefits you've seen from doing that.
Yeah, I don't mind maybe jumping in
go ahead.
first. I think just firstly, obviously, we've got some great panelists here, but we're super lucky at Xbox to be surrounded by so many, I think, amazing developers who are making very different types of games, but working on a very similar problem sets. And I think over the years that I've been there and worked with lots of people, I think sharing's been a lot in our DNA. We're very fortunate at the Coalition to have formed a new group we call the Xbox Games Technology Group, where we're trying to kind of look to share things like knowledge, technology, both Unreal and engine agnostic. But the whole idea is that, as we look at game development, it's becoming harder. There's lots of things that we're all trying to do. We see a lot of, dare I say, shared systems or kind of duplication in a lot of things that we do. And we're hoping that if we kind of collaborate and work together more, we can free up resources on specific game teams to kind of do what they do best and make really, really awesome games. So, this is something that we've kind of started very recently in the last 18 months or so. And we're kind of like growing and kind of building this muscle, even to the point where we've been very fortunate enough to actually open source some of these solutions to the wider community. So the stuff we talk about here, some of it hopefully in the future will make it into that space. One thing we're particularly proud of, which I think has definitely helped and benefited a lot of studios, is what we call these performance engagements. So as a group in the Xbox Games Technology Group, we kind of come in and actually speak to teams about where they are in production, might be entering production, might be going into alpha, and really just ask them, and this is specifically around Unreal development for us, but try to give them like guidance and knowledge and kind of share our experience with using Unreal to basically try to, let them get the best out of their engine, and their content as they've been building it, and really hope to like level all boats around us so that everybody can be shipping kind of super quality titles in the future. So.
Yeah, so I want to jump in here because my team has recently, a couple of months ago, done one of the XGTT performance engagements, and we learned a lot because it's a very seasoned people, lots of experience, know everything there is to know about Unreal and then some, and we've saved a lot of milliseconds on our team on both GPU and CPU with everything we learned. But more than that, it kind of leveled up our whole team. So we now have more skills to like for the content we're building in the future. So it's training everybody up. But actually, there's two separate performance, at least two different kind of performance engagements within Microsoft. There's this one, and then there's also one that is not as Unreal focused, but it's very GPU focused, which is you do a PIX capture or a couple of PIX captures and send them out to a mailing list of about 50 of the smartest rendering engineers in the company. They all said they're domain experts. They all have their little areas of expertise, and they point out, like, why are you doing this draw call twice in a row? You're wasting 100 cycles here. All of these little things that they can spot because they have 20 years of experience, and they all focus on something different. So this has really helped raise the frame rate and raise the team up. But it also means that everybody gets a chance to share their knowledge just beyond their own little team. Like, you get to have a bigger impact than just working on your own project. And so I'm actually looking forward to, in the future, on future XGTG engagements, a couple of our people can maybe come in and help out as well. We're kind of building everybody up to help each other. Another thing that we've gotten out of XGTG is, so one of the things that takes a lot of time with Unreal is whenever you do an engine upgrade, whenever you go from 5.2 to 5.3 to 5.4, that is a huge process, and sometimes it's a little risky, and sometimes things break. Fortunately, the Coalition, they are more on the bleeding edge than we are, thankfully. So whenever there's a new version, they do the upgrade, they figure out all the painful things, they write up the report and share with all of us so we know what we have to watch out for, or, well, maybe we should wait for the point release. So that has definitely saved us a good amount of time. So thank you for taking the pain. You're welcome.
Yeah, at Double Fine, we were an indie studio for a while, and we were kind of out there on our own. I imagine some of you who are smaller devs kind of feel that way, where there's a lot of knowledge out there. It was a real unexpected surprise when we joined Microsoft. We had, obviously some trepidation about joining a big company, but the benefit that we've gotten from being able to pick the brains of some of the other devs has been huge, and not just across programming, but also across other disciplines, like tech art in particular. It's nice for our engineers to be able to look at the work being done at the other games and ask how they did that, and then us being able to actually contact the engineers and get answers to those questions, and vice versa. I look at one of our engineers over here, Aaron. He did some real cool portal technology in Psychonauts 2, and other studios have asked that, how does that work? And we've been able to, typically with games you have to be pretty protective of what you do, and you can't open those channels. Mm-hmm. Being able to talk a little bit more openly among the other Microsoft devs has been huge. It's kind of raises the water for all of us.
Yeah, we found the same thing. We also had a perf engagement with XGTG, and we found the exact same thing. They were able to give us a lot of very helpful information. We were able to give them some information that we hope was passed along as well, right? But what we found at Obsidian is that we work on a lot of different games at once, right? And as a result, we were able to share a lot of knowledge internally as well, right? If one team is working on a game and having a certain issue, another team is able to come in and sort of inform them what that issue is and what's going on. And maybe that information originally came from XGTG, right? So, right, like that sort of information sharing happens a lot in our studio. And we keep a dedicated fork of Unreal where we sort of do all of that painful porting process ourselves and then share it amongst all of the different teams, right? But the other thing that we found with respect to Unreal is that there is a lot of helpful information sharing online via UDN, but also through the different vendors like AMD and NVIDIA. They also have a lot of good knowledge about the engine, and they're willing to really help out when it comes to their specific hardware and stuff like that. So, yeah.
I mean, Machine Games has not been a part of Microsoft for that long. Mm-hmm. We've been a part of ZeniMax since Machine Games started. And then ZeniMax got acquired by Microsoft. But inside ZeniMax, we seen similar things going on. Like we reached out to, for example, for Indian AOs, we reached out to another studio because we're gonna do jungle. We have not done jungle before. Like, okay, what are some tips and tricks of what not to do and where should we be going with this, basically? So those picking brains, and that has happened, people coming to us as well, like, oh, how did you solve this kind of thing? Exactly. seen before. And one other interesting thing that's happened a lot in Cinemax is that we do a little bit of load balancing sometimes. We actually lend out engineers and art and design people to other studios when they have the need for it. And then they come back with a lot of knowledge from that studio and how stuff was done there, and etc. And this is also a give and take and the collaboration that can happen between studios. And the same thing happens with, not the same thing, but there's a lot of collaboration with hardware vendors, etc. that happens as well in the industry. And sometimes we find bugs in drivers and they find bugs in our software, and then it's this back and forth that goes along that just, helps everyone. And in the end, that helps the gamers because they get less bugs in their software. And hopefully it doesn't crash on them.
Hopefully.
So I think, one of the main takeaways here is just we have this sort of performance triage process where we'll share our work with other teams or other developers within our own team to get feedback and kind of build up that knowledge. And I think that's kind of the key takeaway here. Before you start sending your PIX captures to Soren, the way that we work is when we do this within studios, yes, we build up knowledge, and I think there's takeaways that you can apply at your own studios. But we also take the learnings that we see in patterns to kind of improve the platform, right? We run into some issue, we'll work with the GDK team to improve it. When we worked on the Matrix Awakens with Epic, we had some takeaways to then claw back some memory with the GDK, working with the GDK team, or we'll look at the tools that we're working with PIX and give some feedback to the PIX team, or in the case of Unreal, if we see systemic improvements, we'll work with Epic to try and improve that. We don't have like one specific game engine that we profess to be the engine to rule them all. We've got lots of different engines involved. But we take this learning to kind of build up our expertise across our teams on best practices for optimization, and then where we can, we push systemic learnings to improve the whole development ecosystem, just healthy. Okay, so with that, we got a few minutes left, so we will open it up to Q&A. I will say beforehand, we're not here to talk about any unannounced products or new features at our different studios, but we're happy to take any questions just, about game development and any of the topics that we've had today. So yeah, you can just come right up to the microphone.
Hello. Thank you so much for this panel. I think my question is based on the cross-pollination that you mentioned before about you're sending developers to other game studios. I think one of the things I want to zero in on is the connective tissue that you once spoke about, and commonly in Min design spec. These different platforms still have their own constraints. How do you design when the connective tissue is the branding? Like, I need this cool animation, or I need this kind of layout. How do I transfer that from a big screen like the Xbox to like a small screen like a phone? Is there like a methodology or some kind of insights that you could provide?
So, when we look at this, we always want to ensure that we have the best experience on every platform that we ship on. We try not to dilute down to like a common denominator against everything that we're doing. So it is important to be able to test on the different devices, kind of the things that you want to do, and ensure that you are spending the effort to take advantage of that hardware, that user experience. I think, a large screen, 4K, living room experience is very different than a handheld experience, and how you think about your user experience is important. So a lot of that comes down to different forms of scalability. Like we think about like accessibility features in our game, like font resolution and UI layout. Those are things that are excellent features for accessible gaming, but you can also use them to tailor your experience for different devices. I think as part of this, you also have to pick your spec. You want to go across a wide range, but you need to figure out where is the sweet spot, because depending on the type of game you're making, you may not be scaling across every device, but if you're making a different kind of game, maybe you will. So.
Can I also add a detail? So I think it's important not just to think about the different devices, but also what do the people that play on the devices, how do they like to play? Like if you have someone that play, like if you're shipping on a console title, you want to be able to sit and not even look at the settings and just go straight into playing the game. But if you have a PC game, you want to provide the options to customize a whole lot of things, because people they have their certain keyboard and mouse and controller setups that they want to configure before they go in. On console, people don't necessarily want that. So you want to make sure you think of the users as well.
I think it's also important to look at the unique input controls and stuff that are unique to devices. On Psychonauts 2, working with the xCloud team, they have a TAC overlay kit to make a new set of controls that are touch for someone who's streaming it from the cloud with the xCloud Play. So for us working with that team and putting together a different interface that built on top of our game that was unique to that kind of type of platform was something that we looked at, because that's what the people on that platform are going to expect. You got to deliver the experience that they're wanting.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi. My question is mainly regarding a topic that was discussed this week and I think it was Monday. A team from Microsoft came here showing the capabilities of Copilot within Xbox, and both for players and creators. My question is, how do you see these tools or these integrations from AI tools helping with integration and testing and everything really in the development sphere, right? For you guys, how do you see them evolving your work or helping actually?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think we're still pretty early in exploring, where some of these AI tools would show up, and I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think the way that I think about it is how can these empower our developers to do things that they want to do, right? Tools for artists, tools for engineers, developer efficiency and power tools, versus anything that would circumvent or replace the creative process that goes into making games. We have used things like Copilot for code generation and Visual Studio, and these types of things could evolve and get better for game development.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of us are asking these questions as well, like what are we seeing in this space and where will it go? So I think it's a really relevant, timely question. I don't have a prescriptive answer on where it will go. I would just say, I think, like you, like us, we're all sort of looking at this and trying to think, how can this space empower us to create better games and meet our players where they are.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello. I want to start by thanking you all for the panel.
Thank you.
I did want to ask a question of what would be your best advice for networking crossplay across all platforms like PC, Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo Switch, to ensure it's a smooth experience for all?
From a networking standpoint?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. So, we use, at our studio, it may be different in different groups, we've been using Azure PlayFab, and it has multiplayer dedicated game servers across all Azure's data centers. That's evolved over quite a long time. And we also use their matchmaking service. And what's interesting about it, it's different than where it was in the past, where this might be tied to an Xbox Live account or a specific ecosystem. It's completely agnostic, but they've evolved it from, I would say, the more mobile space they've been in to kind of having AAA studios use this technology. So we use that, Ubisoft use it, a few others. And so it provides a solution that allows us to have unified matchmaking, unified kind of dedicated game servers across the planet. It's been a good success for us. So I would say that's a big part of the way we've approached it. And we also have used their back-end account linking so that we can do account linking across, Steam as well as, other like Microsoft platforms as well. Yeah. Anything to add?
No.
Yeah.
We haven't done much multiplayer, but we use PlayFab for Youngba as well,
Yeah.
for the matchmaking, matching up people, etc. as well.
Okay. Thank
All
you.
right. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Hi. I had a quick question for you guys. When looking at your past experiences as new consoles were introduced and released, were there any unique processes or challenges to be mindful of when that new platform was introduced to a project at your company?
Gosh, how many war stories do you want?
Any and all of them?
I can answer it. I think it was more challenging before because architecture way back was a lot different between consoles. If you're going back to 360 and like PS3 era, or going way back to Saturn for that reason,
Sure.
the consoles were so different from each other and so different from PC. That has become a lot easier nowadays. If you look at it, like PC and all the major consoles are kind of the same architecture and stuff like that, which makes it a lot easier. And software stacks, etc., are getting more and more in line with each other. So it's a lot easier nowadays to get going on several platforms than it was before. So nowadays it's not too troublesome, I would say, like getting other platforms running.
Yeah, I think go back to the comment we had earlier of like looking at your min spec and is that platform within that min spec space? If it's lower, you've got to be careful of like, okay, if I'm trying to go lower than I was before for my min spec, does that change my pipelines, my out content, like, my performance and like memory benchmarks? Just being careful of like, where does that fit in your ecosystem? Because it might hopefully be an easy thing to add in, but there is obviously complications depending on kind of where it sits and what you're trying to target previously. So
Yeah.
To go off what Chad said before as well, is that if it's a new console, etc., or a new platform, whatever it is, and if you look at your min spec, where does it sit? And we have always done 60 FPS. So if it's a lower end machine, maybe 30 is expected, and then you're like, oh, I have twice the amount of performance suddenly.
Yeah.
So there's stuff like that you can do as well to like sort stuff out.
Yeah, I think one thing, is we all have like PC versions of our game, and a lot of us do that just for development, even if we weren't shipping on PC, but we all do, of course. Having that canonical min spec there, and then thinking of that as, okay, how do you bring that to all the different platforms you're going, understanding that usually memory can be a specific challenge on an embedded device or console, so you have to think about how you're going to scale down to that. Scalable systems are a key part of all of this. It's sort of a theme of kind of everything we talked about, whether that be memory or considering CPU or graphics. So yeah, every like platform is going to be a little bit different. So focusing on standardization is important, whether it's your own tools, your own game engine, or making choices for the technologies you're using that will be able to bring to other platforms. Otherwise, you're going to be doing a lot of bespoke work or duplicate work across those devices when they show up. Yeah.
I think one thing we've found is when you're optimizing for the different platforms, and if they are a little bit different performance-wise, you often end up turning off some rendering features, which means you're going to really have to adjust lighting per tier or per platform, if that's possible. So hopefully you can set it up so that your different consoles all match with different PC tiers so that it's easy to switch if you're using Unreal in the editor between low, medium, high, ultra to match whatever your different console targets are. Otherwise, it gets really hard to match everything up.
On a practical level, I'd say get a couple extra dev kits. Never hurts. I know your graphics engineers will probably want to grab the first ones, but get a couple extra for your test team and for your artists to look at, as we said before. The sooner you can get it in the hand of your development team, your artist, and they can see what it's going to look like on that platform as soon as you start getting there, that'll accelerate you and save you a lot of time.
Yep, dev kits to the rendering artist, to the UI team, to the effects artists, to tech artists. I think those are probably the main people that need to see it.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome, thank you.
So I think that's all the time we have for questions. If you have more, stick around at the front. We do have some of the architects here from the GDK, the game input team have also told me they're going to be around at the Xbox Partner Lounge tomorrow. So if you're interested and you have more questions, you can go there. You have evaluation forms, so I've been told to fill those out. Let us know how we did. And once again, thank you for coming to our panel.
Thank you.